All right, welcome to another episode of Coffee with Colleagues. I'm your host, Greg Blitz. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about DACA and how it relates to education. Okay. Greg, another one of these sensitive conversations. I don't know if I can handle another one. Shh, it's okay. We're going to be joined by two incredible educators who have a heart and passion for this subject. Who are they? Ivonne Orozco, the New Mexico Teacher of the Year for 2018, and Mandy Manning, the National Teacher of the Year for 2018. Oh my goodness, what a star-studded lineup for today. How did you manage to do that? This is going to be a great episode. As all episodes go, we're going to tackle the subject, talk about its implications in education, and we're going to talk about our roles raising the dialogue on this sensitive issue. So let's get started. Welcome. This is such an awesome privilege to be joined today by Ivonne Orozco, the 2018 New Mexico Teacher of the Year, and Mandy Manning, the 2018 National Teacher of the Year. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
And so the show is Coffee with Colleagues, but today I believe that most of us have tea, so it'll be a special edition of Tea with Teachers. What is both of your? There we go. What is both of your beverages of choice? Your caffeinated beverages of choice?
In general, I love coffee. Coffee is my favorite.
Do you drink coffee black, Mandy?
Oh, no way. No way. I have to have some creamer, either French vanilla or hazelnuts.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, for me in the morning, definitely coffee. If I'm feeling fancy, Starbucks vanilla latte. But this afternoon, I'm doing a lavender peppermint, like home mix. Like I mixed it myself. So
Delicious.
yeah.
Is it from the garden, or is this
the peppermint is the lavender I bought, but yeah.
That is awesome. So I have an apple fritter. One of my favorite tea stores was closing down, and so I picked up a few bags of loose leaf. So that's what I'm consuming today. We are going to be talking about a very sensitive topic today, and this is inspired by a few recent decisions that came into being in the last couple of months, right? The last couple of weeks in particular. But before we get to that, I was just curious, what events or personal passions led you into education for both?
Well, I became an educator by accident. So, initially I was studying to be a filmmaker. And but when I finished film school, I realized that I no longer wanted to be a filmmaker. I think partly because I started my career in like a TV news station, and there's not a whole lot of hope in a TV news station. That sounds terrible, but every day I was nervous or had anxiety that I was going to be sent out on some awful story. Because always in the news program, there's always something terrible that has happened. And that kind of drives the news cycle. There's the bad things that happen. And my outlook on life just doesn't lend itself to that. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a friend who was a para-educator, which is an instructional assistant in a special education classroom. And they needed more para-educators. And so I applied. And that was my first dose of how hopeful kids make you feel about our future. And so that was my first foray into education, and it kind of stuck. And so 21 years later, here I am.
And Ivonne, what about you?
That's awesome. Mandy, I actually didn't know that about you. That's cool. Learning new things. So for me, my family immigrated from Mexico to the United States when I was 12 years old. So I was in the 7th grade. And middle school is fairly difficult, I would say, for most people. And when you don't have the language or the culture, that can even be harder. And so all along, of course, teachers were there. Picking me up and holding me accountable and knowing that I had lots of potential. And so that was, an initial inspiration. But then later when I went to college, none of my family had gone to college. And so I was just taking lots of really fun classes, which a degree does not make. So I was taking jogging fitness and birding and nature writing, which is all really fun. And then when it came time to pick a major, I had a bunch of Spanish classes. And so one of my high school teachers said, you should look into the College of Education. And because I already had so many Spanish class hours, it just made sense to become a Spanish teacher. And so it was also kind of accidental, but just of not knowing the system of how credit hours work and add up to a degree, which is such a basic thing that as a straight A student, nobody ever explained to me. So it took me a really long time to finish my bachelor's degree, but here I am about to start my 7th year of teaching next year. So.
Congratulations.
Ivonne, what I love about your story so much is that part about just not knowing, where we take so much for granted in how we interact with kids and the assumptions that we make about what they know about how to navigate our systems.
Yeah.
And so kids might know that they're supposed to go to university, they might know that that's an expectation of them. Sure. But they don't really know what that means. They just know that they are going to go and take classes like you. That was, I think that's such a, I just love you, Ivonne.
Yeah, that's incredible. I ended up into education similarly by accident. In high school, I was just adept at presentations, and my teacher said, "You should become a teacher." And I said, "I have no patience. I can't become a teacher." And I was just absolutely gonna go into history. And so in university, I was history and politics, and I did an internship for Senator Mike DeWine, and I was very keen on maybe going that full-on political route. And then I took education as like a fallback career, because you see all these politicians, they get booted out of office, and so they end up becoming maybe a professor or a teacher. And so I thought, you know what, just for a safety net, I'm gonna do that. And it turns out after I did my internship, I realized, whoa, I had a lot more patience than I ever thought possible and imaginable. And that's how I ended up here. And so I'm kind of going full circle, where I'm getting back into some of my political roots and talking about some of these very, very hot topic issues that are affecting us in our society today, and how we as educators can use our teacher voices to influence the landscape around us. And so thank you both for being on here. The second question I have for you is before you became the Teacher of the Year, both the national and the New Mexico Teacher of the Year, what were some of the things that you, your perspectives, the flavors that you were putting on inside your classroom, or your focuses?
I think for me, it's always been really important to have really authentic relationships with students. And so I think that's one of the things that, stood out in my community when I was nominated, and then later on in the state application when that was read. I think relationships go a long way. And if you don't have strong relationships with your kids, then you can't be a decent teacher. And so that for me has always been really important in bringing in the knowledge that students already have into the Spanish classroom. There's always a lot of intimidation in the Spanish class, especially in a very diverse community like in New Mexico, because a lot of kids, their grandparents or their parents do speak Spanish, and they grew up hearing it and they can't produce it, right? So they come with a lot of that to my class. And so a lot of times, they would say, well, my nana doesn't say it like that. Or I showed, my auntie this worksheet and she had no idea what verb endings you were talking about. So, they just don't know Spanish the way we're learning it. And, so backing that up and saying, whoa, 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 like your nana's Spanish is just as valuable, and your auntie is right because of this, we're just learning it this way in school, but this matters too. And so, never telling kids that where they come from isn't good enough. And so that's a big, part of my pedagogy, and, still trying to do that now with remote learning is a bit harder and I'm struggling, but we're going to get there.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, not in the same context, because I I just recently left the classroom. So for the last 4 months, I've been working for the Washington Education Association, advocating for students and educators in our schools in Washington State. But in my previous, when I was named the Teacher of the Year, I was teaching new immigrant and refugee students. And then the first part of this year, I was back in my classroom doing the same thing. And ever since I started teaching, and I've taught in several contexts. I've taught drama, I've taught debate, journalism, English language arts, and then closest to my heart is teaching English learners. And so I have always focused on relationships. That's always been the main thing. And I think part of that comes from me not knowing what I was doing when I very first started teaching. So I just did whatever was instinctually like what I wanted to do based on how I was responding to each situation. And then also thinking about the teachers that I had and what impact they had on me. And the teachers who made the most impact on me were the ones who made me feel seen, heard, and valued and welcome. And so that was always my first thing in my classroom, regardless of whatever content I was teaching kids and individual personalities, and every kid brings different, talents and gifts and capabilities and cultures with them. And so trying to connect with them on those levels. And I think I'm so glad when I think back over my career that's because I just didn't know what I was doing. That I did, that's what I did, is get to know the kids. And then that carried that through, and come to find out, how many ever years later that was actually really, really important.
I mean, it's super, super powerful. Well, I don't have much experience teaching English language learners here in America, but I taught English language learners in Egypt and in Hong Kong. And I also spent about 3 to 4 months in Thailand working with child refugees in Thailand, where I wasn't in they called it a bamboo school, but it wasn't really a school. It was more like I would consider it kind of more like a camp experience, but there were a lot of orphans. And man, nothing opens up your own eyes when you realize, holy smokes, these kids have had, you take your worst day and that is like their best day almost. Some of the experiences that they have experienced. And my lens have also been shifted and opened through to the lens of my wife. My wife she's a native Arabic speaker, and she immigrated here to the United States, and she ended up in the classroom teaching English language learners. And so the coolest thing was seeing her teach and instruct, and being able to visit and watch her deliver the materials, and the authenticity. Mandy, you talked about that. Both of you talked about authenticity. That is the most powerful moment, is when I've stepped into other classrooms and seen, teachers like my wife and say, hey, I'm an English language learner myself. We're going to get through this together. And it just was just incredible, incredible moments. So I want to take you back to 2017, 2018, that transition. And I'm very curious, how did your perspectives, after you were named the Teacher of the Year, how have your perspectives shifted and changed in light of the new platforms that you've inherited?
I don't know if my perspectives have shifted or changed. I think that they just were amplified. So as an educator, we're often valued and vilified for the same thing. So we're valued because we love kids and we want what's best for kids and we work with kids. But we're also vilified for those same things because people view it as emotional or maybe weak, or that we're not thinking of the whole system or the whole picture because we have this soft spot for kids. And so it's such an interesting thing to navigate, this idea that we're so important, right? Educators we're told constantly how important we are. But then at the same time, when there's decisions to be made about education, when there's decisions to be made about our classrooms, right now is a perfect example. We went from being, these amazing humans who shifted on a dime when we had to shift to remote crisis learning, to now they're like, no, teachers don't know what they're talking about. We need to go back to normal, right? And this has always been the case. And so when I was in the classroom, before I was named the 2018 Washington State and the National Teacher of the Year, I knew I could see the inequities. I could see everything that was going on, but I was very confident in what I was doing in my classroom. But I also knew that there's the advocacy you can do from within your own classroom is limited. And so in order to be heard outside of the classroom, you need to be recognized in some way in order to have the clout, for lack of a better word, to be invited to some of those tables. And so then I go on this journey of being Washington State National Teacher of the Year, and all of a sudden my people are seeking my voice on things that I wish that we sought educator voice all the time, but we don't. And so I think that the amplification came with being able to travel across the United States and witness and experience and talk to so many different educators and see that those inequities or those issues that I was seeing in my own school are happening across the nation. And that it's even more important that educators move outside of their classrooms, not leave their classrooms, but make their voice heard and tell their stories of what's happening in their classrooms to impact what the decisions that are being made. Because we have to. Educators need to be leading the conversations around what happens in the classroom and in the school and in the district and in the state and in the nation, because we know we have the experience and the expertise to really make the best decisions for kids, because we know who they are, we know what they need, and we know how to get them to where they can be productive, happy members of our communities.
I think for me, my perspective and my voice did shift significantly, and that's because back in 2017, when I was happily teaching Spanish in my classroom, and I had turned in the application for State Teacher of the Year, and I wasn't really expecting to be selected. I was a very young teacher. I was only in my 4th year of teaching. I knew it was kind of a long shot, but I led with my story, right? And my passion for my kids and what I do. So then when I was named Teacher of the Year, it was almost like the media and the state and the title and the platform kind of outed me in many of the things that make my life unique, right? I'm an immigrant. At the time, I was a DACA recipient, the very first dreamer to be named State Teacher of the Year. I'm a queer woman of color. I occupy a lot of spaces that are underrepresented, and when my story was out there, then it was out there. And it was almost like I had to give up a lot of my, ¿cómo se dice? Like being anonymous, anonymity. I had to give that up because suddenly I was put out there, right? And I think a lot of immigrants are really good at what they do because that's what we do, right? We keep our head down, and that's what I had been doing for years. I went to school, I was really good at it. I got straight A's, then I became a teacher, then I was really good at it. And then suddenly I had to give up my quiet life in my very small charter school classroom. And it was good. And it was good for me. And I'm so glad. And I feel like I'm, 20 years older than I was 3 years ago. I've grown a lot. And I am so grateful that I went through that experience, but it was definitely a lot of stretching all of the time and a lot of conflict because I wanted to share my story, but at the same time, that comes with a lot of friction in my life, with a lot of friction from my family, with a lot of friction from my students, from the community, and so I think my voice has changed a lot, not my perspective. I think who I am is always there in my heart, and I always lead with my personal story, but my voice has become so much stronger. I can walk into a room and I feel like I deserve to be in that room. And I did not feel that before the platform, before the title, before the announcement. And so I'm grateful that I had that.
So I've got a fun story to share about Ivonne. And that goes back to your anonymity. And you had more anonymity than you probably realized even after you were named. So I was invited, I applied to be a liaison, a teacher liaison, and I got selected. I'm the school liaison, and I'm a nobody. I'm brand new to the state. I've been living here for like 2 years, and I'm eager. And so I go to this, I think it's the first training session. And so I hear that Secretary of Education, Christopher Scouse, I'm just so excited. They have us sitting down at a table and we introduce ourselves. And so we had to tell something about ourselves, and we did that. And then the speakers, they said, okay, we need to stand up and go to a different table. And I said, well, I don't really know much of you. And so why don't we just all say that we all introduced ourselves here at this table, and then just I'll take a seat here. And Ivonne, you were right there, and you said, well, I'm sorry, Greg, I already know you now, so we're just gonna have to go to a different table. And like, who is this person? And then I find out you're the New Mexico Teacher of the Year, and I'm thinking, oh, you dummy, what a horrible first impression I've now made on somebody that's important. But I'm so thankful that you've decided to come back come and join us on this show. And one other little shout out about Ivonne, my principal, Sam Obenshane at Cottonwood Classical, he retired a year before last. Ivonne, you taught his children, so what a cool tie-in. Again, before I made a fool of myself.
Yeah, so I taught his youngest, Tegan, and I knew his oldest, Carly, but she wasn't in my class. And then actually right now, the local chapter that I'm running of Teachers Against Child Detention, which nationally I started with Mandy, and now locally I'm running here in Albuquerque. I'm running with Dare Obenshane, who is Sam's sister. And so, lots of Albuquerque connections, and she's just a powerhouse. I mean, she's amazing. So I'll talk about her later on.
Absolutely, and we're going to definitely talk about Teachers Against Child Detention. So you brought it up, DACA. That is the subject of today's conversation. So what is it, and why is it so? Why do you think it's so divisive here in American society? Try not to be as political as we can, recognizing that teachers have their different political identities. But what is DACA?
my existence is political, so I'm not afraid to be.
Absolutely.
But DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And it was a program, an executive action that was taken by President Obama that allowed for young adults who arrived at the United States when they were children to be deferred from deportation. And it allowed us to get a work permit. So it has no path to citizenship or even legal residency. So it's just a deferred action from deportation. That's basically all that happened. We were just told, okay, you can't be deported now, which was a really big deal for people like me. And DACA was announced right before I graduated from UNM. And so then I was able to start working as a teacher right away. So the average DACA recipient is mid-20s, right? So I think many times when people think of DACA or they think of Dreamers, they're still thinking of children. We were children, and now we're adults, and most of us are working very productively in society. We have to have a clean record. You have to renew every 2 years. It's a little bit over $500. It's not free. Nobody's doing us any favors. I am a pro at fingerprinting. I think I'm probably out of all the state teachers of the year, I'm probably from our cohort, I'm probably the one that has had the most background checks ever, because I'm just, I've been through it every 2 years. I've been through it from my residency. I went through it when I went to the State of the Union, and then later when we went to the White House. And, so I've been in those databases for a long time. So DACA is a really, really great program that offers a lot of hope for a very small group of people, a very small, very qualified group of people, especially right now in this global pandemic that we're seeing. A large percentage of DACA recipients are essential workers, and they are working as medical essential workers. And so they're providing that for this country, right? So I was a DACA recipient through my marriage. I now have my permanent residency, which is wonderful. My younger sister was also a DACA recipient, now has her permanent residency through her marriage, which is wonderful. But my younger sister, who came when she was 7, I was 12, we actually just took her first trip back to Mexico. We were supposed to go for spring break, and then COVID happened and we didn't. And so we went this past week. We just came back literally yesterday. And we drove down and we saw our older sister, who she had not seen for over 16 years, almost 17 years.
Wow.
And I was 12 when I left Mexico. I had memories of, middle school and my first kiss, and I hung out in the neighborhood. I have lots of childhood memories. I grew up there. My sister doesn't, right? So I find Mexico beautiful, and I'm a tourist, and I take pictures and I buy souvenirs. And my sister was just kind of like, yeah, it's nice. I'm glad to be here with our sister, it's all right. And I was like, what do you mean it's all right? And then it hit me, right? She is literally the children who don't remember the country where they're from. That's her, right? So when we talk about that, this is the only country that we've known. This is where home is. And I feel that in my heart about New Mexico, about Albuquerque. But my sister literally has no attachment other than my older sister who lives there, and she was happy to see her. Other than that, she was just like, yeah, it's okay. And so, just our perspectives are so different because of those, those 5 years, right? And so, so DACA was, again, an executive decision. So another executive decision could potentially take it out, right? Which is what the current president has been trying to do. And then the Supreme Court said, well, that is unreasonable. These are all fine young people who are working, productive members of society. You can't just overturn it. And so that was the Supreme Court decision, and everybody was really happy and everybody celebrated. But gosh, do we need something more? We need something else, not just for DACA recipients, but for dreamers and our parents and everybody, 12 million people who are here paying taxes, doing what they need to do, showing up to their essential jobs, wearing masks, paying for services that then they can't receive at our local hospitals. So we need a lot more, but the Supreme Court decision was like one good thing this summer.
That is incredible. And a little tie-in to Mandy, I went over to Washington this summer with my wife. Now, the funny thing is my wife's family, they're all Egyptian immigrants, and they moved to Washington. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. So I grew up they moved to Vancouver, Washington. I never would have thought in a million years I would take a trip and see two very disparate and distinct parts of my family, my assumed family clan now. And so when I go out there, I'm like, Naveen, look at this. This is incredible. Oh my gosh, I remember this. And she went there once to visit her sister, and this is her second time, and it's nice. I'm here to see my family. So it is that reminds me of that. Mandy, you've talked about almost having a little bit of whiplash with a lot of the different decisions that are being made currently and politically, and certainly the Supreme Court decision has been you can't do that, right, to the current administration. What are some fears that you think might happen in the subsequent weeks or months to follow the Supreme Court decision blocking any reversal on DACA?
I think that every victory, we're excited, right? We're like, oh, good, there's some rationality here. There's people being rational about what's happening with immigrant communities in our nation. And I just want to highlight what Ivonne said about that DACA doesn't guarantee anybody in anything besides the fact that they're deferred, like the potential to be deported is deferred, as long as they work or study or do all of these things to contribute to the communities in which they live. And part of the thing about immigration policy and everything and social perception of what is happening is so, it's tied up in a lot of misunderstandings. And I think people don't really understand what DACA is. And so I really appreciate Yvonne's explanation of what DACA actually is, because I think it's important for people to know the facts. And maybe they wouldn't push so hard to eliminate DACA if they really understood what it meant. And the rights that it gives and the rights that it does not give. And that's so important. But there's so much happening around immigration. DACA is a victory, yes. But there's so much still that needs to happen. And we've seen just in the last couple of weeks other things that have happened that are very frightening, that people can just be deported without any kind of due process. This push to eliminate the asylum as an option for coming to the United States, like essentially saying, we don't care what's happening to you in your life, you can't come here. I mean, that's just devastating when you consider some of the situations of the individuals and the families who are trying to come to the United States. I just read an article today about, it was in Color Lines, which is an online publication, and about immigrant families right now having to decide if they are okay with separating from their families because of the COVID outbreaks in immigration detention facilities. And so they're like, okay, well, we'll let your kids go, but you have to be separated from them. So we have family separations happening. We have children being incarcerated in immigrant detention centers for no other reason than that they were not born in the United States. there's so much left to do. And so for a moment, we get to enjoy a decision. For one moment, we get to enjoy this feeling of victory. But, you know, it's one breath, and then it's a continued fight. There's so much that we need to do. And I think Ivonne also brings up a really important piece of information about the fact that so many of our essential workers, which we have found are essential to our economy and the health of our society,
Yes.
are immigrant workers. And so we need to have pathways to coming to the United States. We need to have, we used to have special work visa programs that have been dismantled. We could bring those back. There's so many things that we could do. And just simply recognizing how valuable immigrant communities are to the United States. I see this every day in the students that I teach and their families, and the value that immigrants bring to our nation is immeasurable.
You know, it's a remarkable. You don't really know the depths of how you feel about it until you see the person, right? Until you actually see that connection. This impacts so and so that I know. And I remember it was right after it was a week after the first travel ban, right? And my wife, she had green card status at the time, and so she was traveling. She's the deal maker, and so they realized that flights to Oaxaca was cheaper if they flew out of Juarez as opposed to Albuquerque, and so they crossed the border. And the only problem was she left her green card in her other wallet. So she had emptied the night before and put everything in her other bag because it was larger, right? And so it had more things in there, but there was a little secret pocket that she kept her green card in there for safekeeping, because you have to carry it at all times. And when she crossed the border, they said, well, you don't have a visa into Mexico, nor did she have a green card back into the United States. And so the most terrified I ever was in my life was in the 5 hours I'm driving and racing down to the border to hopefully find my wife, because they took her cell phone and everything was gone. My good friend David Klein, he actually is the one who drove me. He's like, Greg, you're in no condition to drive right now. So we drove down there and brought the green card back. But it was terrifying because they were rapidly deporting people from the border. And that there were even green card holders that were being denied entry. There was one person from Jordan who actually fought with the United States in one of the wars. I believe it was against ISIS, and he was denied entry, and it was just terrifying. And so I remember writing letters to my congressman. I remember making phone calls and say, hey, this is a matter that is very important. And so we never really quite realized how significant an issue is until we really see the face of who it affects. And so,
right. Can I just add really quick, because I think Greg, that your story is also really important, and Ivonne, you could probably speak to that fear as well, for sure. But my students, I stay in contact with my students, and the majority of my students, once they leave the Newcomer Center, because many of them are refugees, and I think we need to also mention that there's a lot of different types of status in the United States, and so some are immigrants, some are documented, some undocumented. There's a lot of language that we use, and then there's refugees. And the way that the system is moving right now, they're trying to eliminate all immigration to the United States, whether that's, I mean, we just saw with the courts striking down the international student visa this administration tried to put forth, that they were going to make international students, if it was not face-to-face, then they couldn't come back. So there's a concerted effort right now to eliminate all immigration, regardless of what type of immigration it is. And so what we're seeing in our communities right now are people who have gone through the whole citizenship, everything. They've gotten their green card, their, you know, their residency and their green card, and then have moved on to become full citizens, naturalized citizens in the United States, and they still have fear that they're going to have their U.S. passport removed from them. And this is some, and the unfortunate thing is that there are stories out there. There are actual stories out there of people having that happen. And so the level of fear in our communities right now is astronomical. And we try to communicate rights, you know, immigrant rights, but then the next day something else happens where it undermines that feeling of, oh, I have rights, because it's just every day something else happens.
Thank you. That's it's a perfect, you know, segue into the question. How do these decisions, you know, affect the lives of our students? Because that's the important thing. And I think, Mandy, you've touched upon that. Ivonne, how have you seen some of these decisions affecting the lives of your students?
I think, you know, our students, especially right now, are so politically aware, and our students are so involved. You know, I get a lot of my activism, you know, posts and knowledge from my students, you know, who follow me on Instagram, and you know, and I get to see the work that they're doing, you know, the environmental work that they're doing, and they're truly concerned, rightfully so, about their future. And so I think many times people who don't work with children, with young adults, they think of children and young adults as people who like live in a bubble and might not be affected by everything going on, and that's absolutely not true. I think it's the opposite. They are so aware and they are so affected by everything that is going on. So our students are aware, and they're involved, and I think it affects them in many different levels and layers. And what you guys were just talking about, like that fear, and there's a whole movement, and I'm not part of the undocumented and unafraid movement, and I love that movement. More power to that movement, but that's not me. You know, like every minute that I was undocumented, I was scared. Like, you know, we were just talking about this with my sisters. You know, we were reminiscing about when we were young, and they were like, you always followed the rules and you always came home early. You never even got a speeding ticket. And I was like, you bet I didn't. You know, like, yeah, sure, my friends were, you know, out drinking in the fields of Estancia, you know, that happened. I wasn't there. Not because I didn't have friends, not because I wasn't cool. I don't want you guys to get the wrong impression. I was cool. I was a cool kid, okay? But I didn't have any leeway to make a mistake. I couldn't be out of line for 1 minute. And so I think our students feel that. And if they don't have to feel it for themselves, they feel it for their parents, or they feel it for their grandparents, or for their tío, or, you know, whoever might be, you know, still trying to make it here, you know. And there are so many people that are waiting on their status, or just here, you know, undocumented, whatever it is. And our students feel that, and they know that. And I think a lot of them are actively working to make the world the place that they want to see, and the place where they want to live. Of course, that takes a lot of work, and a lot of support from people like us, telling them, like, yeah, keep going, keep doing that. We believe in you, because you are the now, and you are making things happen for us later.
Yeah. And in my experience, so just to give some context, so there's roughly 71 million people have been displaced from their homes worldwide. Okay, so like 71. I think the number is larger now, because those numbers are from the 2019 report, I believe. But 52% of those displaced are children. And as a result of that displacement, children on the move have missed 1.5 million weeks of school. And again, those numbers are from 2019, so you can only imagine how much that has increased. So we're looking at kids who are experiencing interruptions in their education. We're seeing kids who are experiencing trauma of the journey, whatever journey they have had to take, moving from one place to the other. And that doesn't even count. There's like millions, tens and millions more who are displaced within their own nation as well. So I'm just talking about people who've been displaced from their home country, and are on the move. So they're having those kinds of traumatic experiences just from the journey. And then now with current policy in the United States, they're having an additional trauma of going through detention. And we're not only talking about immigration from Central and South America, or the bottom part of North America. We're talking about immigrants who come from all over the world. So, because I oftentimes this conversation ends up talking just about a subsection of the immigrant community, but there are kids from African nations, there are kids from Eastern European nations who are also being held in detention centers. And so what happens is the kids then, previous to the current situation with COVID, because COVID has like just blown that all up and changed some of the processes that they're doing right now. But before that, we weren't seeing, deportations of unaccompanied children to wherever they decide to deport them to. We were seeing kids extended periods of time in detention centers. Sometimes it was, 20 days, sometimes it was several months. And then after they've experienced that detention and or separation from their family, because oftentimes they did not come unaccompanied, we made them unaccompanied. Then they're being placed into our communities and into our schools without support systems, or frankly, without support for educators to even know what's going on. So in my classroom, I have had kids who have gone through detention, and it manifests in a lot of different ways in what happens in the classroom. They tend to have hard time paying attention. They tend to have physical responses to their trauma. So they have lots of headaches, lots of stomach aches, they have excessive exhaustion. They have a hard time maintaining and building effective relationships because they have I can't remember the actual term, but attachment. They have attachment issues because of everything that they've experienced. They have an increased chance of dropping out and not. I mean, immigrants in general already have a higher rate of dropping out or not finishing their education, and now we put this on top of that, this additional trauma of the experiences once they arrive here. That is causing that to increase as well. So we're seeing, the trauma that kids are going through, and that then we as educators have to somehow know how to respond to in our classrooms. That's a whole issue. But on the other hand, I've also seen from students who were born in the United States and live here, and learn alongside immigrant children, I've seen an increased activism like Ivonne talked about. When I was down in Texas, near McAllen, Texas, last August, trying to visit an immigrant children detention center, I got to meet some kids who, because they were with a teacher who was also an activist, they had decided to take on this project on their own, and they then went to the Catholic Charities that was helping the families once they came out of detention to then relocate to wherever it was across the United States that they were going to end up. They were going into that space and they were doing tutoring with the kids. They were doing all these amazing things to try to help the immigrant families who had experienced detention and were just trying to come to the United States. And you could see the transformation in those kids and how the kids see and experience a lot more than we know. And to see that passion and that desire to have a positive impact, and to recognize that it doesn't matter where these kids and their families are born, that they're part of the community, and young people want them here and want them to feel valued and welcome. And that in all of this trauma and all of this sadness and darkness, the young people, like I said before, they're our hope. And that's, yeah, it's young people giving other young people hope.
Exactly. One of the things as a teacher, especially some of the aims that I'm doing, I want to lend voice to educators like yourselves. And that was the same philosophy that I had in my classroom. And so when we talk about the framing of the United States, we talk about the different, the separation of powers. One of the things I do is to try to make it as real and authentic as possible. And so I invited all students to take an issue that meant something to them, a right that they felt worth advocating for, and they had to write a letter of support, asking a congressman or senator to either change their position or reinforce that position, and they would mail them off. And I was shocked how many people received letters in response. Now, some of them were the copy and paste. You could see the format of this letter looks identical to this letter, but we did get a few letters that were handwritten in response. And those were really eye-opening. And I would take these and I would tape them to the window, and I wrote a big banner, "Democracy in Action," or "Voice in Action," so the students realize that it doesn't return back void. One student, I remember, like the output that I received throughout the year was not to a level of just the quality of work that I received throughout the year. I go, well, I just can keep on working, keep on encouraging. And the student wrote about a proposition in Arizona. And I'm so glad that I was by myself when I read his letter. I was shaking and almost in tears, just because of the passion, the authenticity, every word was measured and polite and powerful and political. And I was stunned. I didn't know how to respond. And so we sent that letter out, and we put that letter into the school newspaper, because it was so eye-opening over what he had experienced and what the communities that he came from had experienced in Arizona. And it's so incredible that we often don't know the stories of our students until we've taken the time to sit there and hear and be moved by them. And so I'm just curious, as an educator, how can we as educators be better and be more intentional about lending that voice, and be more intentional about elevating that and supercharging it, because that's what it's about, because this is the next generation we're talking
So, go ahead, Ivonne. You go.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I just was gonna say that Greg, your example is perfect. Like, empowering kids to use their voice about whatever they are passionate about. I think that that's important, and helping them to understand that the processes to make sure that their voice is heard. I took students to our state capitol to speak on behalf of English learners, and they were able to move some of our legislators towards making sure that standardized testing was not the only way to graduate from high school, because it so negatively impacts our English language learners. And they saw, after they went there and testified to the Senate and the legislature, or to the Senate and the House, that they saw an actual impact from their testimony. And I think that those kinds of things are so powerful. And the fact that, Greg, some of your students got personal letters back, I think those are the things that we do. It's not about making them communicate about whatever it is you think is important. It's about helping them to understand that their voice is important, that their opinions matter, and that they should speak out on the issues that they care about. And then showing them how to do that. I think that that's really important. And then on that note as well,
I was
also
going to ask
empowering.
you about the letters that you had your students write.
Right, yeah. So I also, yes, and so I did something similar, except for I hand delivered the letters to my to President Trump when I was awarded the National Teacher of the Year, and they felt really proud, and we did get a response. I won't go into that right now, but they felt like it was their opportunity to tell their story. Which I think is important. And just like your students, they were articulate and they communicated their journeys and how thankful they were to be here and everything they wanted to do in their life to give back to the United States. It was incredible. But I was going to add on that note that educators not only need to empower their students to use their voices, but educators also need to use their voices, because we want students to be able to move the needle. Well, we also need to move the needle for our students and for our schools and for our colleagues. But I really want to hear what Ivonne has to say.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's a segue into talking about what we started, right? As a national organization, we started Teachers Against Child Detention, TACD, and when this came about, it was really about using our newly found platform and amplified voices to do something. And at the time, incarcerated children were very mainstream on the media. They're still being incarcerated. We're just not talking about it as much anymore, which is unfortunate. But at the time, it was all over the place. And so we decided to use our platform to create this wonderful coalition with teachers all throughout the nation who care about this, because we see that in our classrooms. We see the need in our classrooms. And so again, not only empowering students, but empowering teachers, right, to speak up. And many times teachers don't know how, and many times teachers do feel like they can't, because it may create some conflict with communities, saying, well, that's political, or you're indoctrinating children, or whatever it is, because you're teaching them about the world. When Teachers Against Child Detention got started, it was very, very empowering, and we were collaborating with teachers from Alaska, and from our cohort. Of course, lots of those teachers came down to El Paso. We did a demonstration, we did a teach-in, we taught for 9 hours at the San Jacinto Plaza. It's all on YouTube. We taught about the history of immigration. There were lessons. We were literally there teaching and educating our community, other teachers, the people who were there. And it was a very, very empowering event. And then after that, we talked as the main coordinators of TACD, and we decided, what we need is local chapters, people who are doing this work with their networks that are close to them, so that they can have the most impact. And so I talked about that. I was teaching at Public Academy for Performing Arts at the time, and I had the opportunity to give the commencement speech at the graduation. Because Tegan Obenshane was graduating, her aunt, Dare Obenshane, was in the audience, and she heard me talking about this and the importance of it. I mean, we talk about it all the time. You invite me to give a speech, I'm going to tell you about Teachers Against Child Detention, because this work matters and it continues to matter. And so afterwards, Dare approached me and she was like, hey, that sounds really interesting. Why don't we get started, the local chapter? Let's make it happen. And I said, sure. So at her kitchen table, a few weeks later, we literally sat down and made a list of all the teachers that we knew in town who would be on board. And then we sent out a massive email for our first meeting. So that's as grassroots as it gets. We didn't even make a Facebook page or anything like that. It was emails of people we knew. And at that first meeting, we had over 60 teachers show up to Dare's house in the South Valley. I mean, it was like a big house party for advocates, you know, who really cared about this, and it was so cool. And so now on our listserv for Albuquerque, we have over 300 teachers who constantly get news of actions and things that are going on. The latest thing that Albuquerque Teachers Against Child Detention is working on is divesting our retirement pension fund from private for-profit prisons. So the New Mexico ERB is currently invested in 2 stocks for private for-profit prison organizations,
Did not know that.
Civic and Geo Group. Yeah, so our money every 2 weeks is going into these detention centers that are literally COVID traps right now. And we've been writing to the board. There's a group that I joined. The group has been working on it for a little bit over a year. Teachers Against Child Detention joined in about November. And since then, it's just been nonstop, you know, communicating with the trustees saying we do not agree. We delivered a petition with over 1,200 signatures and many organizations, and the board just has been very unresponsive. We just presented at their June meeting, and you know, I presented my story. We had a teacher who was incarcerated, very, very similar to your wife's story, just kind of a misunderstanding when he was coming back from Egypt, and then he was detained for 90 days in a prison in California, you know, with an active visa. I mean, just terrifying. So he, you know, of course, described the conditions, no way to social distance, of course. You know, we have contacts in one of the prisons that is out in Estancia, which is where I went to high school. It's one of the private for-profit prisons that's now an ICE detention center. We have contacts there who say, you know, there's a COVID unit where people are infected and they cannot get even Tylenol for their fevers. I mean, this is what people are experiencing right now as we're speaking from the comfort of our air-conditioned homes. So it's just so terrifying. So we shared that with the board and we said, get our money out. It does not line up with our values. The stocks are financially volatile. It makes no sense to have our money there. What are we doing? And the board was basically like, let's move on to the agenda. And it's really, really frightening that, you know, a core group of 7 old white people are making these decisions, and it's just not okay. So their next meeting is coming up in August. At their April meeting, we had about 40 people there. In their June meeting, we had over 115 people there. Of course, everything's happening remote, so we are logging in, and you can bet that in August, we're gonna have double that. And we're not stopping, we're not going away. So that is, you know, the power that organizing locally has, because it started with a list at someone's kitchen table, and now we're doing this type of work. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know that our pension, I mean, that's something I'm stunned, that's tied to something else. And so the question, you know, to the audience is, you know, after learning these types of things, how else can we be more involved? And I'm talking about myself and to the listeners and to both of you. How else can we be more involved in issues like this?
Well, number one, if we're talking about impact in the classroom, is making sure that your curriculum and what you're teaching reflects the students that are in your community. I think that that's really important. And not only does it reflect the students that are in your community, but it also exposes them to different ways of thinking, being, and doing. We need students and young people. We need our colleagues. We need older individuals to really be able to reach across difference, and the only way to do that is to have an understanding of the communities that are you know, of the individuals within your community and outside of your community. But more, I think the whole idea behind Teachers Against Child Detention, and I'm so excited about the work that Ivonne is doing with the local group, is that I was told early on, because my advocacy when being named the National Teacher of the Year was to be an advocate for immigrant and refugee kids and English language learners in general. And as, you know, the policies out of this administration began, it kind of changed and shifted my focus, because, you know, I want to be able to serve English language learners, but then it became more of a, I want English language learners to be able to live here in the United States safely and be welcome. And so I asked a lot of legislators about this, and I would make meetings with legislators specifically about immigration policy. And I was told on several different occasions that until this is a voting issue, until the people rise up and say, hey, we're going to vote you out if you do not create clear pathways that are attainable by immigrant communities, then we will vote you out. And so I think that that's a very, very important thing to understand, that if we want positive change for our students, because I think that that's like the key to this, is that there are kids who are being denied their right to an education, they're being denied their freedom, they're being treated as criminals, and they're just children not born here. And we want them to be able to have that freedom and that education, and to feel loved and welcome. In order for that to happen, we have to be contacting our legislators. We have to be contacting our local legislators. We have to be contacting our national legislators. But most importantly, we have to do the work within our communities, because one community pushes another community, pushes the whole nation. And so we have to make this a voting issue. We have to reach out to those that, you know, we vote into office, and then if they don't listen to us, we have to use our vote to make sure that we get legislators who will listen to us.
So that just means we need to be more informed. We need to know and understand the communities that we serve and we represent. And we just really need to understand how all the issues are connected to one another.
Mm-hmm.
I think you.
Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I think there is also, and when we started TACD National, the first thing that we thought about was, okay, who is already doing the work? Who can we join? Because, you know, it's not suddenly that we had this idea to advocate for immigrants. I mean, people have been doing this work for years and years, you know, decades of work. And so making sure that you're connecting with those groups. So here in Albuquerque, we're working closely with like Santa Fe Dreamers Project, and we're working closely with Nob Hill Indivisible, and we're working closely with the New Mexico Dream Team. We're working closely with Dual Language Education New Mexico. And so all of these people that are a very important piece of a powerful puzzle. And so I think when people are trying to find a group, often you can go to one of those more prominent groups, and then you'll be put in contact with people who are like you and doing the work that you would like to do. For teachers here in Albuquerque, if they'd like to join our listserv right now, it's still kind of very rudimentary. We work out of a Google group. I know we don't even have a but to join that listserv, it's abqtacd.weebly.com. It's still the free domain.
Yeah.
So again, it's abqtacd.weebly.com. And on there's a button where you can enter your email to join the listserv. And so that's the way that we're organizing here. But I think anywhere that you live, there's people already doing the work, and you can join them and go forward. You don't have to create something completely brand new. There's no need to. You can add your power to people already doing it.
Yeah, and in Washington State, it's the Washington Immigration Solidarity Network, WAISN, and they're doing incredible work, and they have created a coalition. So you can go to Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, and you can find groups that are operating within your individual community. We also have the in Lincoln, Nebraska, there's Stand In for Lincoln, which was a break off from Teachers Against Child Detention. So there is a lot. There's things happening in almost every single state. And so yes, Ivonne.
And for all the other listeners from other states, if you're aware of similar movements in your own state, whether this is on Twitter or Facebook, just type in the organization to help other educators get connected, because your voices are important and they're more powerful than you could possibly imagine. Oh my goodness, it was such a wonderful time talking to both of you. Mandy, getting to hear more of your passions. We spoke a little bit last week. Ivonne, it's great to get reconnected. I thank you for the conversation, and I just say more power to both of you. Continue the work that you're doing, and it's such a delight to hear that passion. So keep up the good work, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.